So this piece here might look like it's in relatively good condition, but looks can be deceiving, as I'm about to find out. The story starts about 6 weeks back when we decided to take a much needed vacation in Denmark for a few days. The idea was to get away from furniture and YouTube for a while, but of course it didn't work out like that, and we ended up picking up this super stylish little Danish Teak Secretary Desk on the way back home to Germany. There were some other interesting stories to tell, but I'll come back to all that later. The relevant part was that this was going cheaply, and I thought I had really gotten a bargain because the overall condition looked pretty good, and these things are always easy to sell. The positives are that it features this very cool curled over design for all of the pulls and handles. I don't know what to call this, apart from maybe a waterfall effect. It also has these tiny tambour doors on the cubby hole at the top, which is also very cute, though I think they're going to need some maintenance. I knew it had some peeling edge veneer that would definitely need replacing, and it also has the typical blunted corners, but what I hadn't realized when I bought it was how badly stained and scratched it was and how thin the veneer was looking. There was even one spot on one of the lower drawers where the veneer had been sanded through completely, which I didn't notice until later on, and there was also the fact that the rear left leg had also been knocked off its axis pretty badly too. So although the other 3 legs were good, it looks like this thing has been trashed, repaired or restored badly and then trashed again. And now I've got to try and pull off the magic trick to make it both functional and pretty one more time. Whenever I see these pieces, I always tell myself that they'll be easy to restore, basically in order to justify buying them, when in reality, we've got chipped, worn and peeling veneer, blunted corners, oil stains, water stains, scratches, a wobbly leg, veneer blow through, a missing knob, and sliding doors that don't work properly. I'm just taking the sliding desk tray out here so that I can work on it separately, especially as it's going to need quite a bit of bleach to get those stains out, and a quick vacuum before I use the paint stripper doesn't hurt either, although trying to strip and refinish this little compartment here is going to be difficult and probably not much fun. So the way I generally work is to first strip the finish off, wipe everything down and clean the wood with solvents as much as possible, then do any of the basic repairs with epoxy or wood filler, and then leave everything to dry off overnight. Although in this case I'm also going to use that time to remove the peeling veneer, so I can see if there's any damage underneath that also might need filling. I'm using instant epoxy clay to rebuild the damaged corners because it is very strong and will hold its shape, and I'm just using regular instant wood filler to fill in some of the cracks and splits in some of the veneer. I could have just re-veneered these edges as well, but I'm already replacing quite a bit of veneer on this thing and I do have to manage my time. With everything dried off overnight, I can start the second phase of the preparation. First, I need to sand all the repaired areas flat and give the main surfaces a quick scuff sand so that I can get a better idea of what the veneer is looking like. I'm using a 120 grit sanding sponge followed by a 180 grit sanding sponge, basically just in order to protect the edges of the veneer from being sanded through, especially as this veneer is already quite thin. Lots and lots of filler repairs on this one. Looks like the pull has come off here and then been nailed back on with little tack nails. There's definitely some glue in there too, and it's totally fine, but it does need to be filled in and smoothed off a little bit. I'm not too worried about using the sander on the desktop here, as it's a large flat surface and I can really control the sander a lot more, basically to make sure it's not going to blow through the veneer. The desktop and the top shelf are the areas with the worst stains, and so they are the areas I really need to bleach. I already know that there are going to be some stains and scratches that I'm probably not going to be able to get out, but if I can get these surfaces looking as consistent as possible before I stain them, then by the time it's been finished, it's going to look good enough. Next, I need to prepare some strips of veneer for the edges. Fortunately, I still have some long offcuts from a previous project which were ideal for this job, so I'm just going to use some regular wood glue and whatever clamps will work and try to get these things glued down as tight and as clean as possible. I went and bought a whole bunch of these little peg clamp things because they were the only thing at the local hardware store that looked like they would fit, but they really weren't the right shape, and so in the end I just ended up trying to pull the strips down with painter's tape. And a few of my larger grip clamps. My new trim router has been a great tool for trimming veneer, but it's essential to move in the direction of the grain and make sure that the device is oriented correctly so that the blade is spinning in the right direction. It's kind of hard to explain, but basically if one or both of these things are wrong, it will just rip and splinter the veneer instead of cutting it. And so this whole process is actually quite a lot more involved than it looks, and it's easy to make a mess of it. Even using the router correctly, I still had to re-glue some sections because the veneer had ripped and splintered, but this was mainly because there was already quite a bit of damage on some of the edges, and so the adhesion with the glue wasn't the best. At this point, the only practical solution is to just use more wood filler and sanding to try and clean it up as much as possible. Again though, with a job like this, it doesn't need to be perfect, and I personally feel that with the combination of the styling on this piece and the finish I'm going to be using, these little imperfections form part of its character and its vintage charm. What's important are the broad strokes. It has to be stable, it has to be functional, and it has to be pretty to look at. So those are the three things that I'm focusing on here. In terms of functionality, the missing pull on the sliding desk is another repair I forgot to mention at the start, but rather than replacing one of them and trying to make it match the other one, I decided to just cut the remaining pull off and replace both of them. I'm not sure what the optimal solution for this would have been, but the one I came up with was to drill some pilot holes into the front and then screw in the mounting screws that came with the knobs, using some glue to account for the fact that they are machine screws and not wood screws. After cutting the heads of the screws off, I'm then putting glue on the bottom of the knobs as well, to create an additional bond directly between the knobs and the desk. Although I'm using my regular oil-based mahogany stain for this piece, I'm actually going to use a water-based or dye stain on the new knobs I just installed, because they're made from oak, which is a very hard and dense wood, and which is just not going to absorb the oil in the same way, whereas the water-based mahogany stain will do much more to darken the knobs and bring them closer to the color of the veneer. It does look a bit pink at first, but once the water stain is fully dried, I can then go over them again with the oil stain, which should help in adding some warmth and getting a better color match. This is now the fourth project in the row where I've used some form of this mahogany oil stain to get that Nordic red color tone, which was so common in these Scandinavian teak pieces. In the past, I used to mix things up a little bit more and experiment with different color tones and variations, but I just find this particular stain to be so warm and rich that I'm always satisfied with the results. The concentration on this one is 50% stain and 50% mineral spirits, and with so many scratches and repairs to contend with, I'm going to need to keep adding more as I go along to blend out the touch-ups. With the stain drying, I'm going to use that time to repair the damaged framing joint where the bent leg is. I don't know how much this will help, but at least I've got some glue in there so it won't come apart or get any worse. After letting the stain dry off overnight, I can now start the French polishing process. I'm just using a blended mix of shellac to lay down a base coat and see what direction I want to go in with the colors and the layers, as I'll be laying down 3 coats at a minimum and I don't want it to be too light or too dark by the time it's finished. I won't be using a top coat on this piece in order to keep the color as vibrant as possible, but I also don't want it to be too shiny, so I'll use lemon shellac to build the finish with, as it's basically an unfiltered, unbleached variant which still contains a lot of wax, and so you get this richer color with a reduced sheen, which can give you a bit more consistency when dealing with touch-ups and other imperfections like that. With a couple of base coats laid down now, I can start using a combination of stain and touch-up markers to blend out the damaged or repaired areas as I continue to build the finish. For the sliding desktop though, I need something a bit more durable than shellac because it's going to be seeing a lot of use and contact with various objects, so I decided to try out this oil I found in Denmark. I'd originally been looking around for some kind of a Danish oil that was readily available in the stores there to basically take home as a souvenir, but it turns out that buying Danish oil in Denmark is actually harder than you think, because it's just a generic term used mainly in other countries to describe any kind of furniture oil with a hardening agent in it. This stuff here seemed to be the most common generic product, and so I decided to get a can to experiment with, as it claimed to offer a high durability with a natural low luster finish. The instructions said to apply 2 coats consecutively, making sure that the grain was soaked evenly, and then wiping off the excess after about 20 or 30 minutes. And so it seemed to be something between a Danish oil and hard wax oil. My only complaint was that once it was dry, it was a bit too low luster for my liking, and it was going to stand out against the other polished surfaces, and so I decided to add a couple of coats of wipe-on poly, basically just to enhance the chatoyance a little bit and give it that little bit of extra shine and durability that it needed. Off camera, I had been playing around with these wonky legs and basically trying to find the simplest solution, and I ended up just gluing on about 2 or 3 small strips of veneer as shims in order to compensate for the bent pinewood substructure. This may not have been the prettiest solution, but because it was only a matter of a few millimeters, it was simple and effective at straightening the legs out once they were screwed back in again. The legs themselves I had stripped and refinished mostly off camera, and I chose not to use any wood stain on them as I really didn't think they needed any, and so all they got was 2 coats of shellac and a polishing with some brie wax. I'm choosing to primarily use teak colored brie wax on this piece because I can apply it directly onto the shellac and really work it into the wood grain to get that vibrant patina, but I'll also use beeswax polish for the desktop and storage surfaces, as I feel it offers a little bit of added protection for the areas which are most likely to suffer from scuffing or scratching. And after sanding the sides of the drawers, I'll brush on a liberal amount there too to help them slide without jamming. In order to create a stopper for the tambour doors, I actually decided to just use a staple from a nail gun. It's thin enough that it still allows the doors to close, but strong enough to stay straight and do the job. So my goals with this piece were to make it functional, stable, and pretty to look at. I like to think I've accomplished all that, but let me know what you think in the comments. And of course, if you've made it this far and you want to see more, please do like and subscribe. For now though, thanks for watching.